Chapter 18. Despite my deep feelings for Roberto, I still wouldn't call it love. I hadn't heard from God as to whether he was the one. Until I did, our relationship couldn't go anywhere. All weekend long I prayed, waiting on an answer. Nothing. On Monday, several of my coworkers were scheduled to attend a training class, leaving it virtually empty. I was alone, holding down the fort, when Timothy stopped by my desk. "How are you doing?" "Fine." After a brief glance at him, I turned my eyes back to the screen. Though Timothy was an extremely attractive man, I found no pleasure in gazing at him. "You got a minute?" he asked. Sighing inwardly, I shifted away from the screen. "Sure. What do you need?" I asked, assuming he was putting in a supply request. Such frequent interruptions were a daily part of my job. No sense getting annoyed. "I've been doing a lot of thinking and praying. I think I made a mistake," Timothy said. So this visit is personal, not business related. Knowing to what he referred, I still derived perverse pleasure in making Timothy spell things out. "About?" Timothy rested his elbows on the counter partition that separated my desk from the walkway. "You. Me. Us." I knew what God was telling me, but I didn't want to listen. There had never been an us. I want to say, but the simple truth spoken would make me sound bitter. God, what are you doing? About 6 months after Ronald and I split, Timothy came to me, hurting and upset. He'd caught his girlfriend in bed with her ex-boyfriend. A Christian like me, he'd let himself get caught up in a physical relationship with this woman. He'd bought her things and given her money, trying to help her and her children, only to discover she'd been using him. Having gone through something similar with Ron, I was able to minister to and console him. Over the next few months, we became closer. In the early hours of the morning, before the office filled, he'd come by and talk. Whenever he came into the accounting section on business, he always made time to stop by my desk. Then the dreams started. I believed they were from God, showing me Timothy was to be my husband. I'd even gone to my pastor to discuss it with him. God confirmed my suspicions in prayer. After the Ron fiasco, I'd been extremely cautious and unsure God knew what he was doing. For one, I knew I wasn't Timothy's type. He liked his women petite and thin, really thin. My height was right, but my size wasn't anywhere near what he preferred. Fortunately, I hadn't been in love with Timothy or even physically attracted to him. Though I'd be the first to admit Timothy was good-looking enough. With his wavy black hair, light complexion, and golden brown eyes, he was one fine brother. And that, I mused as I gazed at him, was part of his problem. Timothy was used to women throwing themselves at him, especially given the lack of eligible Christian males in the church. I determined not to be one of them. If I'd heard God correctly, and he wanted Timothy and I to marry, then Timothy would have to do the chasing. Besides, I'd still been raw from my breakup with Ron. Despite my personal feelings and opinion on the subject, I'd been willing to obey God and at least be open to the possibility of a relationship. Timothy hadn't. We discussed it one day. While he could feel God pulling the two of us together, he determined to go in a different direction. Timothy said he'd met a woman he liked and was considering asking her to marry him. I wished him every blessing and much happiness, but knew if he was going against God's will for his life, his relationship, it wouldn't work. Since my emotions weren't engaged, his decision didn't hurt. But I'd be lying if I said my ego hadn't taken a hit, especially since I knew the main reason for Timothy's rejection was due to my size. "Aren't you getting married soon?" I'd seen the announcement on the bulletin board and knew the date was close, if it hadn't already passed. He shook his head. I broke it off. It wasn't right, and I knew it. I'm sorry to hear that, I told him, and meant it sincerely. So, Timothy glanced around, as though assuring himself we were alone, and leaned closer. Would you like to go out to dinner with me Friday? If you aren't busy. I sat back in my seat, discreetly rolling my chair at the same time to subtly increase the distance between us. I'm seeing someone. He drew up abruptly, scowling. Oh, is it serious? I thought of Roberto and my response to him. Yes. Twisting the ring on my finger, I remembered what I'd learned when I searched the internet about Roberto's gift. The ring, a Celtic love knot, meant love without beginning or end, a promise of forever. Are you sure that's wise? Don't make the same mistake I did, Timothy warned grimly. I'm not. Thanks for the offer, but I'm sure you understand why I have to decline. Mentally, I urged Timothy to go away so I could think. Pray about it. If you change your mind, my offer still stands, he stated before walking off. Now, turmoil filled my thoughts, destroying my peace. I know whenever God had a blessing for you, the enemy presented a counterfeit to try to trick you and cause you to miss out on the real blessing. The question was, which one was the phony? Roberto or Timothy? I wish I knew. Over the next few weeks, Timothy made it a point to stop by my desk and engage me in conversation. If he had my house or cell phone number, I was certain he would have been calling. Before leaving, he always asked about Roberto, calling into question my relationship with him, and asking if I was sure this was God's will for me. The whole office noticed the attention Timothy paid me. Word spread, as gossip tends to, and eventually, Ron heard. Who knows? Maybe Timothy told him he'd been trying to get me to go out with him. In the beginning, when Ron first sought my attention, Timothy had been his champion, proclaiming to me what a great guy Ron was and how I should give him a chance. Maybe he was hoping Ron would reciprocate? Ronald must have thought since I hadn't managed to run Timothy away, I might be open to giving him another chance. Since I don't always comprehend how the male mind works, I'm not sure what one had to do with the other. All I know is after months of actively avoiding me, since the email incident in fact, the man was suddenly underfoot. Having been shot down once, Ron decided to try a different approach. He stopped by my office one day right before lunch on the pretense of needing a few office supplies. I rededicated my life to Christ, he told me as he walked to the supply room. I cast him a quick glance. That's nice. I hate to ask, but would you be willing to share some scriptures and maybe eat lunch with me occasionally in my office? I have lots of questions about being saved and I want to grow strong in Christ. Your faith is so strong. It's one of the things I've always admired about you. His dark brown eyes seemed so sincere. You want me to mentor you? I asked, somewhat taken aback. He frowned. I guess you could call it that. I just know I need help. Even if it was a scam, as I suspected, what kind of Christian would I be to say no? Sneaky bastard. Ron knew just how to play me. So, I found myself eating lunch in the lunchroom with Ron 2 to 3 times a week, not as often as he'd originally requested. True to his word, he did ask a lot of questions about the Bible and growing up as a Christian, but he also tried to ease personal conversation in as well. I stayed on guard and didn't allow him to drag me into reminiscing about the good old days when we first got together. Also, I ignored every sexual innuendo, though he carefully kept those to a minimum. I didn't know what to do or which way to turn. 3 men actively pursued me. Roberto, the man I loved, Yeah, I'd finally admitted it to myself, who I'd yet to hear an answer from God on, despite my many, many prayers, and Ron and Timothy. Two men I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt at one time God intended to be my husband. Ron was simply an annoyance. There was no way I'd go back to him, no matter what tricks he used. Unfortunately, unlike Timothy, he did have my phone number and didn't hesitate to call. Despite the many times I cut the conversation short or outright hung up on him. I told him about Roberto too. Either Ron didn't believe me or decided my having a man made me more of a challenge and therefore more appealing. Timothy was proving to be very persistent. He used every opportunity he could find to undermine my relationship with Roberto, pointing out he and I were the ones who should be together. He reminded me if he hadn't been so disobedient, we'd already be married, doing the Lord's work together as God intended. It's ironic, really. At one point, I would have welcomed him chasing me. What was hard about dealing with Timothy was part of me wondered if he was right. When God gives you a promise, he doesn't always say when it will come to pass. Could it be the timing between us before was wrong, and now was God's appointed time for Timothy and me to be together? While I still hadn't received an answer about Roberto, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt what God had said about Timothy. When Timothy went in another direction, had God given up on him, or had he simply bided his time, dealing with Timothy's heart until he was ready to fall in line? After weeks of unbelievable stress and mental mayhem, I broke. With my desperate appeals to God for clarity and direction going unanswered, I turned to the one person whose spiritual counsel I'd come to treasure. I called Roberto. I have a situation and need some advice on how to handle things, I told him. Can you come over? Sure. I'll be there in an hour. No questions, no demands, just his steady assurance he'd come whenever I needed him. No wonder I loved him. I took the time I waited for his arrival to straighten the house, thankful the twins were with their father. Privacy was needed for this conversation. Other women might have hesitated discussing their issue with one of the men who were a part of it, but I had no doubts. Roberto would put his personal feelings aside and give me the wisdom I needed. Roberto arrived and I greeted him with a kiss, holding on to him to absorb his strength. He held me close, stroking my back and murmuring soothing, nonsensical sounds. Finally, I sighed deeply and released Roberto. Feel better? He asked. Yes, much. Being with Roberto always comforted me. We walked to the couch and I sat facing him. Talk to me, Roberto encouraged. I did. I told Roberto about Ronald, my entire relationship with him, the good and the bad. Then I explained about Timothy, our history, and both men's crazy pursuit of me. I spoke of my frustration and confusion, and my prayers for guidance which remained unanswered. The telling took a long while, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of peace when finished. There was something to be said about shared burdens lightening the load. Roberto had listened quietly throughout and now asked only one simple question. What does your heart want? I hesitated. People say you should follow your heart, but the Bible says the heart is deceitful above all things. I'd learned the hard way my heart couldn't be trusted. What if my heart's wrong? I countered. It won't be. Roberto sounded so sure of himself, and I'd called him for advice. There was nothing I hated more than for people to ask me for advice and then totally disregard it when I gave it. The answer to his question was simple. My heart's desire had never been in doubt. It was not knowing God's will causing my confusion and turmoil. I want you. You're the one I love, I said simply. Roberto grabbed me into a bear hug. Finally, he shouted to the ceiling. I hugged him back, laughing and crying at the intense relief and peace flooding my soul with my admission. Roberto kissed me, and in his kiss, I felt all his love. There was no doubting his feelings were true. He cupped my face with his hands. Marry me. Yes, I answered, though he demanded, not asked. I still don't know if Roberto was God's choice for me, but I could no longer deny my heart. Thank God. You led me on a merry chase, woman, Roberto scolded. His hand slid down to hold me by my nape as he rested his forehead on mine. But you love me anyway, I stated with confidence. Every day, and for the rest of our lives, he assured me. The end.
The end? Surely not. Don't worry, Nina and Roberto's story continues in Season 2.